How do I describe the outcomes of my project in a grant application? Well, in this video, I'm going to be sharing three essential strategies to help you better communicate and, in many ways, better plan for these applications and program management, the ability to actually manage this program uh, in so far as that you're able to think through things ahead of time. My name's Benjamin Dean. This is grantgetting.com. I hope you enjoy this video and the others like it on this channel. They're all aimed at helping you get more grants. Be sure to check out the link in the description for a free download of 7 additional tips in preparing your project outcomes. So number 1, define your project outcomes using a SMART framework. This first step, if you will, involves using the acronym SMART, the tool SMART. This is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Each of these 5 things, you want to have a coherent explanation for, or data point, or phrase, or something that you are planning for in terms of whatever your project is. This helps create well-structured outcomes for you as you're planning the programs, or for your team as you're actually planning these programs. And then, of course, in the application, it does a whole bunch of things. One of the things that it does, obviously, is it gives a more coherent and clear description of what it is that you hope to or plan to achieve if you receive the money. This is the what is happening because you are receiving funding. It helps funders understand more clearly what is the project, what is its potential for impact. Another thing that it does that ties into other parts of your application and, again, in your planning process, is it gives you, within the application, a chance to reference other points of the outcomes in other sections of the application. So for this point and the next point, this idea remains true, is that in some applications, when you get to the section that is specifically asking for the project's outcomes, there may be limited characters. There may be a very specific window of type of information that you can provide. It might have to be numerical. You might then have to pick from a drop-down list. I've seen that before, of what type of outcome it is, or multiple drop-down lists. Sometimes it's not a free text response. And even sometimes when it is a free text input, it doesn't give you enough characters or enough space to fully get this point across. So what that gives you the opportunity to do is expand upon that by referencing it in other sections. So the cross-reference for this point and the next point will be, one of the cross-reference points will be the measurement types. So in addition to having very specific outcomes, having them be measurable, and that's the key point we're going to talk about in a second, having them be actually achievable or feasible, and that's a programmatic operational question. If you can actually do this, what resources would be required for this to occur? Relevant is covered in the next point, and then time-bound. With a specific deadline by this time. Typically, grants are over a 12-month period, so you're looking at sort of milestones along the way. So the measurement tools, the M, measurement, number 1, you want to pick something that you can actually measure. Now, there's all sorts of ways to measure qualitative information, such as, let's say, reducing homelessness. As a very generic goal or outcome, but how do you measure that? If I were to say this program aims to reduce homelessness, well, that is not very specific, potentially not really measurable, obviously achievable if you're doing something that does that, but again, to the degree that something is achievable, it must be measured. So those two kind of go together. Relevancy may be perfectly relevant for this type of funder that you're looking at. And then, of course, just that one statement, reducing homelessness, is not time bound. So, that would be an example of, one that isn't smart. But one way to think about it in terms of referencing back to your objectives, your outcomes, your smart outcomes, is to know very specifically how you're going to measure for this. Now, in some grant applications, you'll have a specific section that says, how will you measure this, which is then great. It gives you the opportunity to talk about that. You can reference other videos specifically on measurement tools on this channel to learn more about that. But if the grant application doesn't ask that, or doesn't ask you for your program evaluation plan, you still want to speak to it. It's one of these things that, I don't want to call it a bonus point, but it certainly strengthens the application when you hit that, not just that it is measurable, but how you're going to measure it. So the more that your application can talk to itself and be one thing, one complete thought, one complete story, the easier it is for a reviewer to score you highly. Okay, it gives you less gaps in their rubric typically, and also gives them a better sense that you actually know what's going on. So SMART framework, so specific, just to go into that directly, that is as specific as you can possibly be. And that will depend on point number 2, which I'll go into in a moment, which is what are the priorities of this funder. So the exercise to do that I would recommend if you haven't done this is start with a whiteboard. If you already have your program developed, let's say it's a program that you've already run and something that you've done in the community in the past, either through a pilot or through, some degree of years of operating it. The outcomes of that project are likely varied. There may be many outcomes, intended or unintended, from the original design of the program that happen, things that happen because of the things that you do. Again, needing to differentiate, at least in your own mind, the difference between an output and an outcome. An output would be basically what you're counting. How many people came into your facility to receive services? 50 people came in during this week or this month or this quarter, right? You're counting. That doesn't tell you the outcome. That tells you the output, the direct counting number. Okay, the outcome is going to be more so the change, the delta, the transformation that has occurred because of your interventions in the people, in the animals, in the environment, in the groups that you are serving through your program, whatever that is. So the exercise is to get on the whiteboard, look at your program, and list everything that you can possibly think of. And you don't even have to call it an outcome. You could just say, who is affected by the things that we are doing? Who is affected by us providing this service to the community? Everyone, direct or indirect. It doesn't matter. This is a very important exercise that will help you gather the information that you need to be able to first even select the outcomes. Because again, every program that I have ever seen has more than one outcome. All right. If they are only able to provide, a program manager is only able to provide 1 or 2 outcomes, it just means they haven't really thought about it. Right? They haven't thought broadly enough or deeply enough about the impact that they're having. Everything that is done in the social service sector, so far as I can see, has outcomes that are direct, indirect, intended, and unintended. Now, if you've run the program before, you have the benefit of maybe knowing some of those things and maybe even having some evidence for that. Okay, so when it comes down selecting your outcomes, you want to be selecting ones that will go to number 2 on this list, which is align with the outcomes of the funder's priorities. Okay, so you're going to select outcomes maybe that are obvious, right? The primary outcomes of your program, or in grant terms your project. But then how is it that you describe them, right? Not so far as trying to spin it, not so far as trying to manipulate anything, but specifically, how do you describe it? Aligning your project outcomes with the priority of the grant making institution is critical. And this again goes back to the research step, which is knowing the funder's mission, their values, their previous grants, who they've given to the degree that you're able to find out why they gave to a particular organization by talking with that organization. You can look at the press that this organization is putting out, which is, a very good sign of the things that they care about, even if it's more so implied in the RFP or in the application, FAQs or whatever it is. But for instance, if a funder prioritizes community health, emphasize how your project's outcome contribute to community health. All right. So if you have direct service in your program or your project, that's wonderful. And if the outcomes section of your grant application that you're filling out is set up such that it will only intake individual, outcomes for people, that's fine. That's what they're asking for. But like a 10 out of 10 application is going to be able to utilize other areas in the application to be able to build upon those outcomes, to talk about what it is that you've identified that that particular funder cares about. So extrapolating upon the fact that if we receive this funding and we operate this project for the next 12 months, we will serve X number of people. That's an output. And because of that, X number of people will see this change in their health. And because of that, that is X percentage of the population in this area. We know from this third-party data that this is a key metric in whatever framework. Social determinants of health is a popular one. It's part of the full circle of creating a healthy community. And that's the role that our organization plays in our community. And this is in direct alignment with what you, the funder, care about. Okay, so that's a bit of the articulation. Every outcome that is selected needs to be directly tied to some degree of a priority of the funder. Now, in some cases, it doesn't need to be extrapolated very much at all. It could just be a very direct one-to-one obvious thing that what it is that you're doing fits that, but you still want to speak to it. In other cases, you want to take some of your maybe secondary or less direct or less intended outcomes from your project and extrapolate just a bit to the degree that you can in the space that you can. It shows funders that your project directly aligns with what it is that they have told their constituents, they have told their funders or their employees or their constituents that they care about. Okay, you want to use these two ideas, SMART objectives and alignment of priorities, to reduce the chances that a reviewer is going to say this really either doesn't make sense, it's not fully thought out, or this really isn't a great fit. There are better fits in terms of applications that we've received. Okay, so these are two really important points. The third point that I will talk about here is long-term stability, long-term impact, or many times called sustainability. So the sustainability section of a grant application is most of the time referencing financial sustainability. Okay, it is many times, maybe most of the time, asked saying, hey, you're applying for this $25,000 grant, this $250,000 grant, this $2.5 million grant, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. What are you going to do at the end of this cycle? Are you going to run out of funding next year? Is this it? Is there anything that you're planning for right now to know that this is not a year-over-year grant? What are you going to do? Okay, so that's most of the time what is being asked for. So I'm covering this in this how to structure your outcomes, because most of the sustainability plan sections that I have seen and that I have written and that I have reviewed provide more space than you need to answer that financial question most of the time. The financial question can be answered fairly directly. There doesn't need to be a lot of spin and storytelling in that section. We have 6 donors that have committed next year for $250,000. We project our budget to be $280,000. We expect to be able to raise the $30,000 through this campaign, which starts on this date and has this success rate in the past. That's a way, in basically one very long sentence, to answer that question, right? Of course, that's year 2, then adding another sentence for years 2 to 3, and other ones for 4 to 8, or however you want to do that. But as far ahead as you're able to see, as directly as you are able to speak to it in the sustainability section, that's great. That's going to leave you more space. Okay. If you have aligned your outcomes with the funder's priorities, and if you have used SMART, specifically the T, time-bound goals or objectives, then you're going to be able to, in this section, if you want to, speak to not just this program, but other things that you will be doing or plan to be doing that have the same or similar outcomes. You might be applying for a project that truly is going to be a 1-year project. Or you might be applying for a project through which you don't really know if you're going to do it again next year or in 3 years, or you think you might change it quite a bit. So much so that it really doesn't look exactly the same as it is described in this application. Well, if you've done great work on the thinking and planning of the outcomes, then when you get to the long-term impact, you can reference the other things that you're doing and plan to do sustainably to continue to achieve those same or similar outcomes. That's a big time bonus point, and it helps small organizations who don't always have the money, right? Very, very rarely does a smaller nonprofit organization have in their coffers the ability to do everything they want to do every year, multiple years in advance. If you have that in your bank account, then that's great. And you really don't need to sort of stretch at all. But if you do, and you want to strengthen this section, this is a great way to do it. Okay. And again, it does start with the ability for you to have as a reference point all of the things that come out of your program or your project in this case. So if you can demonstrate long-term impact, that is, again, a bonus point. That's really what the funder cares about. They want to know that they're investing in something that will continue, whether that continues in this program within your organization, or the funding here is going to allow some capacity building to happen within your organization, intellectual capacity, knowledge within the staff, infrastructural capacity, physical assets, physical things, optimization of processes. These are all capacities that you can build and reference in this section and tie back to an outcome or multiple outcomes that you've referenced in your outcome section. That ties the grant application together, and it gives the funder a sense that you're not a, how do we put it? You're not laser focused just on the program, but you're really focused on the outcomes, because that is the thing that truly matters in social services and direct services and basic needs, is the actual outcomes. Okay, so those are 3 things. Now, by doing the SMART outcomes, aligning them with the funder's priorities, and then demonstrating sustainability, you can effectively describe your project's impact in multiple areas in a grant application. So for more tips on how to enhance your grant writing, your grant research, your grant prep, there is a free resource in the description, 10 essential tips for describing your project outcomes in grant applications specifically. A lot of what I am talking about involves program management and program planning. So if you're a grant writer, there's resources here to think about. As a grant writer, how do I engage with the program team? if the program team hasn't thought about it. If that is you, which many viewers, that is the case when you're doing, or at least have your hands on multiple things, that's great. This is very helpful because grant getting is not just about good grant writing. It's also about us, very importantly, about having a solid program. Okay, so these things are tied together. So additionally to that, if you're struggling with anything specifically when it comes to project outcomes, post your question down in the comments and I will respond. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.